My name is Michael, and I've never been the same since that night. At least, I don't think I am. If I'm honest, I don't even know what's real anymore. I was stationed at a remote military base out in the middle of nowhere. My unit had been assigned to keep watch over the place, a barely functioning installation tucked in the mountains, miles from the nearest town. The job was supposed to be simple: overwatch, routine drills, maintenance on old equipment, nothing that required too much thought or effort. But the first night there, something felt off. It wasn't anything that you could put a finger on. At first, it was just the isolation. It was dead quiet, the kind of quiet that sits in your chest and makes it hard to breathe. I'd never been so far from civilization before, and the fact that the base was a half-hour's drive from the nearest road made it even more unsettling. The first few days were a blur of introductions, setting up our gear and getting acclimated to the routines. The guys were friendly enough, mostly. But there was this strange tension in the air, something no one ever spoke about, but everyone seemed to acknowledge. We were briefed by Major Reynolds on our first morning. He was this no-nonsense guy with a face carved from granite. His eyes never seemed to blink as he addressed us, almost as though he was memorizing each of us, weighing our worth. "There are things here you don't need to know," he'd said, his voice flat and emotionless. "Do your job, keep your head down, and never, under any circumstances, leave the base after dark." Everyone laughed it off, but I noticed a few guys exchange uncomfortable glances. I figured it was just another one of those strange military quirks, something to make us feel like we were part of something bigger, more secret. But by the end of the week, I realized how wrong I was. The first strange thing happened one night while I was on watch. The night shift usually dragged on, and all I had to do was monitor the security cameras, check the perimeter, and make sure no one strayed too far. The base wasn't exactly bustling with activity, but that night, something on the cameras caught my eye. A figure, small, hunched over, and moving quickly just outside the fence line. I didn't think much of it at first. There were probably animals out there, mountain lions, coyotes. The base was surrounded by dense woods, after all. But the way it moved, it didn't look like any animal I'd ever seen. It darted from shadow to shadow, almost like it was avoiding the light. I leaned forward, trying to get a better look. My hand hovered over the button to speak to the rest of the team in the control room, but something stopped me. For some reason, the figure looked familiar, like I had seen it before. But where? When? I didn't say anything. The last thing I needed was to look like an idiot to the guys. Maybe I was just tired, I thought. It had been a long day. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Later that night, I mentioned it to Sergeant Harris in the mess hall. Harris was the closest thing to a friend I had at the base. He was laid back, always joking around, but when I brought up the figure I'd seen, he went cold. "You didn't see anything," he said quickly, avoiding my eyes. "You're probably just hallucinating from lack of sleep." "Hallucinating?" I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" He shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "I didn't say anything, all right? Just forget about it. It's nothing." The weird thing was, Harris didn't strike me as the type to be that shaken by a simple sighting. He'd spent more than a few nights on watch before. Something was off, but I let it go. I told myself it was nothing. Just a bad night, too much stress. Everyone gets a little jumpy sometimes. But then, over the next few days, I started noticing more oddities. Strange things that didn't add up. A low hum coming from the old generators, only at night. The doors to the maintenance sheds would creak open when no one was near them. Voices in the hallway when I was sure I was alone. At first, I tried to explain it away. Maybe the wind was just right, or the equipment was acting up. But the more I noticed, the more I began to question my sanity. I wasn't the only one feeling it either. I remember one afternoon, I was cleaning my rifle in the armory when Corporal Sims walked in. His face was pale, his hands trembling as he fumbled with his gear. "Hey, you all right?" I asked, glancing up from my rifle. Sims didn't answer right away. He just stared at the floor, his face tight with fear. Then, almost too quietly, he whispered, "I'm not going to the east sector tonight." "Why not?" I frowned, setting my rifle down. "It's just another patrol. I saw something last night. out there. It wasn't right, Sims stammered, glancing over his shoulder like someone might be listening. It was like it wasn't human. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. This was it. The same thing I had been thinking something was happening to everyone. I told him to calm down, but inside, I was starting to feel it too. Whatever was happening here, I didn't think it was just the stress of being in such a remote place. Something had changed. Something was wrong. The final straw came one night when I was on another late shift. I was going over the security footage again when I noticed something in the corner of the screen, just a flicker of movement. I zoomed in, squinting at the image. There it was again, that figure. But this time, it wasn't outside the fence, it was inside the base. At first, I thought it was just a glitch in the camera. But the more I stared at it, the more I realized it wasn't. The figure was tall now, hunched, its body unnaturally long. Its head turned slowly to face the camera, and for the briefest of moments, I could see its eyes. Black, empty like deep pits of nothing. I froze. My heart slammed against my chest. My fingers hovered over the intercom, but I couldn't bring myself to speak. I was paralyzed, my mind spinning. Was this real? Was I losing it? That's when I heard it. A voice, clear and cold, coming through the intercom. You should have listened. I bolted upright, my breath caught in my throat. There was no way anyone could have gotten on the intercom without me hearing them approach. But the voice, it wasn't anyone I knew. It was someone else. Someone wrong. I snapped to my feet, my mind racing, my instincts screaming at me to leave, to run. I grabbed my rifle and headed for the door, but as I stepped into the hallway, I noticed something else. Footprints. Small, muddy prints leading toward the storage room. I couldn't breathe. My pulse thudded in my ears as I slowly followed the tracks. Each step felt like it was pulling me deeper into a nightmare I couldn't escape. The closer I got to the storage room, the colder the air became. It was like I was walking into something alive, something watching me. When I finally reached the door, I stopped. I couldn't move. My hand trembled on the doorknob, my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to turn back, to pretend I hadn't seen anything, but I couldn't. I opened the door, and what I saw made my blood run cold. When I opened that door, the first thing I noticed was the cold. Not just a chill, but an oppressive, unnatural cold that seemed to sink deep into your bones. It was the kind of cold that wasn't right for the time of year, too sharp, too biting. I stepped into the storage room, the dim light flickering above me like a dying candle. The room was small, packed with old crates and equipment. The kind of stuff you would expect in a place like this, rusted tools, spare parts, and forgotten supplies from decades ago. But none of that mattered. It was the figure standing in the far corner of the room that made my blood freeze. It wasn't a person. Not anymore. At first glance, it looked almost human, but it was wrong in every possible way. Its limbs were too long, too thin, stretching out at impossible angles. The skin, if you could even call it that, was a pale gray, stretched tight over its bones like the remnants of something that had been dead for a long time. Its eyes were wide and black, empty, like two bottomless pits staring into mine. I stood there, frozen in place, my mind racing to comprehend what I was seeing. It didn't move, didn't even breathe. It just stared at me, and the silence in the room became unbearable, thick with tension. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body refused to obey. I could only stand there, feeling like I was sinking into the floor, the darkness of the room closing in on me. I don't know how long I stood there, seconds? Minutes? It felt like an eternity. That's when I heard it again, the voice. Only this time, it wasn't coming from the intercom. It was coming from the creature. You shouldn't be here, it whispered, the words crawling across the room like a shadow. My heart nearly stopped. The voice was a rasp, like it had been dragged through dirt and gravel. It wasn't speaking to me, it was speaking inside my head. I could feel its words vibrating in my skull, twisting my thoughts, drowning out everything else. I staggered backward, reaching for the door, but my feet wouldn't move. It was like the air had thickened around me, holding me in place. The creature's eyes never left mine, and I could feel the weight of its gaze sinking deep into me, peeling away at my sanity. I managed to force my legs to move, stumbling out of the room and into the hall, gasping for air like I had been underwater. I was shaking, my whole body trembling, but my mind couldn't process what had just happened. Was I hallucinating? Was I losing my grip on reality? That's when I heard the footsteps. Slow, deliberate, echoing down the hallway behind me. I whipped around, my rifle raised, but there was no one there. The hallway was empty, the lights flickering above me like they always had. The footsteps kept coming, though, closer, louder, like someone was walking just behind me. I didn't dare turn back around. I just started running, my boots slapping against the cold concrete floor, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I ran until my lungs burned, my chest aching with every breath. But the footsteps followed. They never stopped. I rounded a corner and nearly crashed into Sergeant Harris, who was coming the other way. His eyes were wide with panic, his face pale. "Michael, what the hell's going on?" he shouted, grabbing my arm. "Did you hear that? Did you see?" I didn't let him finish. I yanked my arm out of his grip, my voice barely more than a whisper. "Get out of here, now! There's something wrong with this place. We're not alone." But Harris just stared at me, his face confused and strained. "What are you talking about? You're scaring me, man." I couldn't explain it. I couldn't make him understand. He hadn't seen what I saw. He hadn't heard the voice. I turned and ran past him, heading for the control room. If I could get to the cameras, I could prove it. I could show them everything. Maybe if I just had some evidence, someone would believe me. But when I reached the control room, the door was wide open. I froze again, my pulse pounding in my ears. The room was empty, but there was something wrong. The lights were dimmer than usual, the monitors all displaying static. I stepped inside, my mind screaming at me to turn around and leave. But my body wasn't listening. I went straight for the monitor where I had seen the figure before. The footage was still there, but the figure was gone. No trace. Nothing. I clicked through the other cameras, my heart racing as I checked the perimeter, the storage room, the barracks, everywhere. But all the cameras were showing nothing. Just static. It was like the place had gone dead, as if the entire base had just shut down. Then, the intercom crackled to life. "You shouldn't have come here," the voice said again, this time sounding more like a hiss, more insistent. "You won't leave. You're already a part of it." I spun around, my rifle raised, but there was nothing, no one. The air was thick, suffocating, and the walls felt like they were closing in on me. I didn't know what to do. I was losing control. The isolation, the fear, the voices, it was all becoming too much. Suddenly, I heard a noise behind me. Soft, like the shuffle of feet on the floor. I turned around, half expecting to see the creature standing there, but instead, I saw Harris. His eyes were wide, his face pale, and his mouth was twisted into an expression. I couldn't place fear, yes, but something else too, something darker. "Help me," he whispered, his voice barely audible. His hands were shaking as he reached toward me. It's inside me." I took a step back, my hands gripping my rifle tightly. "What the hell are you talking about?" And then, in one swift motion, Harris jerked his head back, his eyes snapping shut, and the air around him seemed to change. It was like something was pulling at him. Something from within, something dark and cold. His body began to convulse, his mouth opening in a soundless scream, and I could see his skin stretching, pulling, as if something inside him was trying to get out. I backed away, horror flooding my system, my mind refusing to comprehend what was happening. But it was clear now. Whatever was in this place wasn't content with just scaring us. It was changing us. And as Harris fell to the floor, his body contorting in impossible ways, I knew that I wasn't going to leave, not alive anyway. The last thing I remember before everything went black was the voice, whispering in my ear, "You're one of us now." I don't know what happened after that. Maybe I died in that moment. Maybe I'm still here, trapped in the nightmare of this place. But I can't shake the feeling that it's still watching me, that it's still waiting for me to return. And I don't know how much longer I can keep pretending everything's okay. If you're reading this, Don't come looking for me. You'll never find me, not in the way you think, and whatever you do, stay away from the remote military bases. Because some things aren't meant to be found. I always thought I understood what it meant to serve in the military. The discipline, the camaraderie, the sleepless nights on watch, it was all part of the job, right? But there's something they don't teach you about. They don't tell you about the quiet moments when everything feels wrong. The times when you're alone in a room and you feel like you're being watched, but there's no one there. Or when you hear something that doesn't quite belong, but you brush it off because you're supposed to be tough. I'm Sergeant Ryan Walker, stationed at a small, remote military base in the middle of nowhere. It's the kind of place you drive to and immediately wonder why you joined in the first place. The buildings are old, falling apart in spots with that faint, musty smell that you can't seem to get rid of. There are only a handful of us here, just enough to keep things running smoothly. At first, everything felt like it should dull and routine. We had our drills, our shifts, our missions, and then we'd all retreat to our barracks. We joked about how isolated we were, but we always found ways to entertain ourselves. Nothing extraordinary happened here, or so I thought. One evening, after finishing my rounds, I was walking back to the barracks, my boots tapping against the concrete floor of the base. The only sound was the faint hum of the old lights overhead. I noticed something odd as I passed the maintenance room. The door was ajar just slightly. That in itself wasn't strange. We were always fixing something. But as I glanced in, I saw a man I didn't recognize, hunched over a table, scribbling on a piece of paper. His face was hidden in the shadows, his uniform dark and unfamiliar. I stepped closer, the hairs on my neck standing up. Maybe he was a new guy? I had never seen him before, though, and there was no one else supposed to be in there. I pushed the door open just a crack, trying to get a better look. "Hey," I called softly, unsure if I should approach. The man didn't move. "Hello?" I said again, my voice sounding too loud in the quiet room. Suddenly, he turned, his face appearing in the dim light. His eyes were wide, unblinking. There was something unsettling about the look on his face, like he was staring at something far beyond me, as if he wasn't really seeing me at all. "Who are you?" I asked, a nervous laugh escaping my throat. He didn't answer, just stared at me, his lips parting slowly, as if he wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. His gaze sent a chill down my spine. Something was wrong. "Are you new here?" I pushed, but before I could say anything else, he stood up abruptly, knocking the chair behind him. The sudden motion made me step back, my pulse racing. "Don't go in there," he finally muttered, his voice low and hoarse. Then, just as quickly as he had spoken, he turned and vanished into the shadows. Confused, I stood there for a moment, staring at the empty room. My mind was racing. What the hell had just happened? I could have sworn I'd never seen him before, yet his words felt ominous. "Don't go in there." I didn't know what he meant, but the warning stuck with me. I didn't mention it to anyone. I chalked it up to exhaustion, to some late-night weirdness, but the feeling of unease wouldn't leave me. I avoided that maintenance room for the rest of the week, not wanting to think about what I'd seen, or rather, what I hadn't seen. But then, 2 days ago, something changed. I was sent on a routine maintenance check in one of the older wings of the base. It was one of those parts of the compound that never seemed to get much attention, a forgotten corner where the walls were cracked and the floors creaked underfoot. It was always cold in that part of the base, no matter what time of year it was. The air smelled stale, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. I was walking down one of the hallways when I noticed something strange. There was a door at the far end of the corridor, one I had never seen before. It was made of thick steel, the kind of door that was clearly meant to keep something in or keep someone out. The sign on it was barely legible, faded from years of neglect, but I could make out one word: authorized. My curiosity got the better of me, and despite the eerie feeling in my gut, I stepped closer. There was no guard, no sign that anyone had used the door in years. I reached for the handle. It was cold. Too cold for a door that was supposed to be locked away for good. The handle turned with an audible click, and the door creaked open, revealing a narrow, dimly lit staircase that spiraled down into darkness. I hesitated, the hairs on the back of my neck prickling. But something inside me urged me forward. I couldn't explain it. My hand trembled as I reached into my pocket for the flashlight I always carried, and I stepped inside. The staircase was tight, winding deeper and deeper into the belly of the base. The air grew heavier with each step, and the further I went, the colder it became. My flashlight flickered in the damp air, casting long shadows along the walls. It was when I reached the bottom that I felt an overwhelming sense of wrongness. There was no natural sound down here. No humming of the lights, no soft shuffle of footsteps. Just silence. Thick, stifling silence. I took a step forward, my flashlight scanning the area. The concrete walls were covered in old, peeling paint, the kind that seemed to scream for attention. In the center of the room stood a large metal door, much like the one at the top of the stairs, but this one was different. It was marked with symbols I didn't recognize, scratched into the surface with some kind of sharp tool. I tried to turn back, but my body wouldn't move. There was something pulling me toward that door, like an invisible force tugging at the core of my being. My heart pounded in my chest as I stepped closer to the thing I knew I shouldn't touch. I reached out for the door handle, my fingers brushing against the cold metal. The instant I did, a loud bang echoed through the room, louder than anything I'd ever heard. It made my blood run cold, and I stumbled back, dropping my flashlight. It rolled away, its light flickering before it went out entirely. Then, in the complete darkness, I heard it. A faint scratching sound. Something or someone was moving just beyond my reach. I wasn't alone down here, and whatever it was, it knew I had come. I stood frozen in the dark, my heart pounding so loudly in my chest that I thought it might burst. The scratching sound was growing louder, closer, like something or someone was slowly crawling toward me from the farthest corner of the room. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. My brain was screaming at me to run, to get out of there, but my body was betraying me, locked in place like I was paralyzed by fear. Then, a soft whisper broke through the tension. "Help me." The voice was faint, raspy, as if it had been whispering from the deepest pit of the earth. It sounded like a plea, desperate for something I couldn't understand. I snapped out of my stupor. My hands fumbled around, trying to find my flashlight. When my fingers finally brushed against it, I grabbed it and turned it on, the beam slicing through the dark like a blade. But when I swept it across the room, nothing was there. Nothing. I exhaled sharply, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Maybe I was too tired, too stressed. I had been working long shifts and my nerves were shot. Maybe it wasn't anything at all. But then, as the flashlight's beam landed on the metal door in the center of the room, I saw something. It wasn't much, just a faint smear of something dark, slick against the otherwise dull surface. I moved closer, my feet stumbling over the cold concrete floor. As I stepped forward, the air seemed to thicken, the very space around me growing heavier, as if the room itself was pressing in on me. The scraping sound came again, this time much closer. My pulse leaped in my throat, and I turned, but there was nothing there. No one. Just darkness. I took another step toward the door. My mind told me to stop, to leave, but something pushed me forward. Something I couldn't explain, something primal that I didn't want to understand. When my hand touched the metal, I recoiled. The coldness of it was unbearable, like touching something frozen to the core. But before I could pull away, I felt a faint vibration under my fingers. A hum, deep and unnatural, as if the door itself was alive. Suddenly, the room felt like it was shrinking. The walls seemed to close in around me, and I had to force myself to breathe. My eyes darted frantically across the room, looking for some kind of escape. But there was none. The stairs that led back up to safety felt miles away, unreachable. The only way out was through the door in front of me. And then it happened. A loud bang echoed through the room, as if something had slammed against the door from the other side. My body jolted, and I stumbled backward, almost falling onto the cold floor. I froze again, my breath caught in my throat. The scratching returned, louder than before. But now, it wasn't just the sound of nails against concrete. It was something else. A growl, low, guttural, like an animal. No, something was behind that door, waiting. I tried to gather my thoughts, to form a plan, but the panic was suffocating. My hands were shaking so violently that the flashlight's beam wavered wildly in front of me. It couldn't be real. This had to be a nightmare, a hallucination. But the sweat on my forehead, the tightness in my chest, the way my stomach churned told me otherwise. I had to get out. I turned toward the stairs, but just as I took a step back, I heard it again. The whisper. Clearer this time. Please. It wasn't a voice. It was more like a memory, a lost echo. The sound came from the other side of the door, and it was so raw, so desperate, that it sent a chill down my spine. Without thinking, I darted toward the door. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely grip the handle, but I twisted it, and the door opened with a harsh, screeching noise that echoed like a scream in the quiet. What I saw inside made my stomach flip. The room beyond the door was small, barely lit by flickering overhead lights. It was empty, except for the remains of old equipment, broken crates, and bodies. The bodies were piled in one corner, lifeless, their limbs twisted in unnatural angles. They were covered in thick, dark stains that could have been blood, their faces contorted in silent screams, their eyes wide and unblinking. I stumbled back, my breath hitching in my throat. I couldn't comprehend what I was seeing. My mind was trying to rationalize it, but there was no rational explanation for what lay before me. And then I saw it. A figure, crouched in the farthest corner of the room, its body skeletal and gaunt. Its skin was stretched tight, like it had been pulled from a corpse, its face an unsettling combination of human and something else. The figure's eyes were wide, empty holes in its skull, but somehow I could feel its gaze pierce through me. It wasn't human, not anymore. It stood up slowly, its joints popping like they hadn't been used in years. I didn't know how it moved, how it was moving, but all I could focus on was the dark, hollow space where its eyes should have been. And then it spoke. "Get out." The words were slurred, distorted, like they had been dragged through the muck of the grave. But they were clear enough to send my mind into full-blown panic. Without thinking, I turned and ran, my footsteps echoing wildly as I sprinted up the staircase, ignoring the tightness in my chest, ignoring the dizziness that spun in my head. I couldn't hear anything anymore. There were no whispers, no growls, no scratching sounds, just silence, oppressive and deafening. I burst through the door at the top of the stairs, slamming it shut behind me. My chest was heaving, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't stop to look behind me. I didn't care. I just ran back through the hallways, past the maintenance room, back to the barracks. The world outside felt like a dream. But even as I slammed the door to my room and collapsed on the bed, the fear didn't go away. I could still feel those eyes on me. I could still hear the scratching, the growling, the faint whispers. It wasn't over. It couldn't be. I don't know what's down there in that room beneath the base. I don't know what I saw or what I interrupted, but I know one thing for sure. I can't escape it. And it's not finished with me yet. My name's Ethan, and I can't stop thinking about that night. I don't know if I was hallucinating or if something truly unnatural happened, but I'll never be the same. I feel like I've never truly left that base. I can still hear it sometimes, feel it watching me. It all started with a simple rotation. I was stationed at a remote military base tucked away in the mountains, a place that wasn't really on the map, or at least it felt like it wasn't. The kind of place where the noise of the outside world fades away, leaving you with nothing but the constant hum of the generators and the stillness of the woods. I wasn't alone, though. There were about 30 soldiers assigned to the base, but most of them were veterans, grizzled and tough, people who had been through much worse than the quiet of this place. The routine was simple enough. Watch the perimeter, maintain the equipment, and keep an eye out for anything unusual. After all, it was just an outpost. But then, a week after I got there, the orders came down from higher up. All the soldiers were leaving. "Base has been decommissioned," Sergeant Davis said to me, as though it was nothing out of the ordinary. "You'll be here alone for a while, but don't worry. You're just here to clean up and pack things away." It sounded harmless enough at first, even kind of peaceful. One soldier in charge of a deserted base. No more drills, no more responsibility. Just me and the empty buildings, the quiet. I didn't realize how quickly that silence would begin to suffocate me. The day the last truck rolled out of the base, I felt an eerie weight settle in. I stood by the main gate, watching the convoy disappear into the distance, knowing I was the only person left. Alone. It was a strange kind of relief, mixed with a creeping unease I couldn't shake. At first, it was simple. I walked through the barracks, turning off lights, checking the inventory, locking up rooms. The base was old, far older than the records said, and the air inside the buildings was musty, heavy with dust. Everything felt abandoned, as though it hadn't been lived in for years. But by the third night, things started to feel wrong. I had a routine. Check the perimeter, do a sweep of the barracks, then get some sleep. The first couple of nights were uneventful. But on the third night, as I was walking past the maintenance shed, I heard something, just a faint noise, like scratching. I stopped, standing still in the dark, straining my ears. Nothing. I shook it off. It was probably a raccoon or some other animal scavenging around. The shed had been locked tight since the last team had left. Nothing could have gotten in, right? But the scratching came again, louder this time. Against my better judgment, I grabbed a flashlight and went toward the shed, my footsteps loud on the gravel path. As I got closer, the scratching stopped. A cold knot formed in my stomach. Something felt off. I reached for the door handle, but just as my fingers touched it, I froze. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I could feel the air shift around me, thick and suffocating. I don't know why, but I stepped back. I left the door unopened and went back inside the barracks, the noise still lingering in my head. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Every creak of the building seemed amplified, the distant hum of the generators louder than usual. I kept hearing soft noises, footsteps, whispers coming from somewhere just outside my room. But every time I opened the door, the hallway was empty. I tried to convince myself that it was just the loneliness playing tricks on me, that my mind was creating these sounds to fill the emptiness. But it wasn't just the noises. Something else was off. The next day, I noticed the first of the strange things. I went through the main building, checking equipment, and when I passed the office, I saw that the door was ajar. It wasn't locked. I was certain I had locked it the day before. I hesitated. Maybe I'd forgotten. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. Everything was as it should be. Papers stacked neatly on the desk, a few old radios sitting on the counter. But the chair in the corner was facing the window, and I could have sworn I'd left it facing the desk when I'd last been in there. I didn't know why it bothered me so much, but it did. I shrugged it off again. Maybe the other soldiers had left in a hurry and forgotten to secure everything. It wasn't a big deal, but it was just the beginning. That night, as I was doing my usual patrol, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The same shed, the one where I'd heard the scratching, was open. The door was wide, the interior completely dark. I was sure I'd locked it earlier. I approached it cautiously, my flashlight shaking in my hand. I stopped just outside the entrance, too afraid to go in. I wasn't alone, I knew that much. And that's when I saw it. A shadow. A figure standing in the back of the shed, just out of the beam of my flashlight. It wasn't a person. It was taller, thinner, too thin, like a silhouette stretched too far, too thin to be real. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. My mind screamed at me to turn around, to run, but I couldn't. I couldn't look away from that figure, its head tilted at an unnatural angle, its limbs hanging loosely at its sides like they didn't belong. And then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the figure vanished. Not fading into the shadows, not turning and walking away, just gone. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over my own feet, and I ran back to the barracks, my heart hammering in my chest. I slammed the door shut behind me, my hands shaking as I locked it. I tried to tell myself that I was imagining things, that I was just tired, alone, with nothing to distract me. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The air felt wrong, heavy, like it was pressing down on me. The next few days passed in a blur. I kept hearing strange noises, seeing things move out of the corner of my eye, but every time I turned to face them, there was nothing. One night, After another round of uneventful patrols, I made the mistake of going into the basement. The maintenance area was down there, and I thought I could at least check on the equipment. But as soon as I stepped into the stairwell, something in the air shifted. The basement was cold, far colder than it should have been. The walls, usually damp from the humidity of the mountain air, were now ice cold to the touch, and the smell something foul like rotting meat or decayed wood filled my nose. I flicked on the light and made my way down, my boots echoing through the empty space. The hum of the generators below was louder here, vibrating through the floor, but I could hear something else too. A low, rhythmic sound, like breathing, but off, too slow. The sound was coming from one of the maintenance rooms. I pushed the door open, and that's when I saw it. A figure. Not like the one in the shed, but worse. It was a man, or at least it looked like a man. His skin was pale, stretched tight over his bones, and his eyes were dark, black as ink, and they followed me. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't move. I wanted to scream, but my voice caught in my throat. He just stared at me, his head tilting to one side, like he was trying to understand what I was. And then, with a sickening crack, he smiled. I ran. I ran faster than I've ever run in my life. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. All I knew was that I had to get out. I had to leave that place. But it was too late. The next morning, when I went back to the base's entrance, I realized something. The gates were locked from the outside. I wasn't alone anymore. The gates were locked from the outside. I stared at them, my breath catching in my chest. The locks were old, rusted, and the metal bars creaked as the wind howled through the empty space around me. I could feel my heart pounding, but I couldn't move. I didn't know what to do. I ran my hands over the chains, trying to make sense of what was happening. The soldiers were gone. They had left. I was the only one left on the base, and yet, somehow, the gates were locked. How? I hadn't heard any vehicles come through. No one had passed by. Everything was still. So why was the gate locked? I tried not to panic, but it was impossible not to. A sick feeling was twisting in my stomach. It felt like the base itself was alive. Like something was watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. I turned around and scanned the perimeter. No one was there. No soldiers, no figures in the distance, no vehicles or signs of life. Just the empty buildings, the old equipment, the mountains beyond the base. It was too quiet. I moved back to the barracks, hoping to find some answers, some explanation. Maybe I was just imagining things. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation for the gate being locked. I tried to tell myself that, but it didn't help. The unease kept growing inside me, squeezing tighter and tighter until I could barely breathe. That's when I heard it. A voice. It wasn't a voice I recognized. It wasn't any of the soldiers' voices, not even Sergeant Davis's. It was something low, raspy, like a whisper carried on the wind, but it felt like it was coming from inside my head. You shouldn't have stayed. I froze in place. My pulse spiked, my throat dry as I turned slowly toward the barracks door. I couldn't see anyone, but I could feel it, something there, in the shadows, watching me. I backed away slowly, my eyes darting across the empty yard. The voice wasn't coming from outside. It wasn't coming from the base at all. It was in my mind, whispering to me, warning me. I couldn't stand it. My hands were shaking uncontrollably, and I could feel the walls closing in on me again. My breath came in shallow bursts as I spun around, looking for somewhere, anywhere, to escape. But then I heard footsteps. I froze. They were slow, deliberate, echoing through the yard. Each step was like a hammer against my skull, reverberating through the stillness, making everything feel suffocating. I turned, panic surging through my veins. And then, standing in the shadows just outside the doorway, I saw him. A soldier. Or at least, he looked like one. He was wearing the same uniform as the rest of us. But his eyes were empty, hollow, like black holes, sucking in all the light around him. His skin was pale, stretched tight over his face, his lips drawn back in a grotesque smile that twisted his features into something unrecognizable. My body froze. I couldn't move. My mind was screaming at me to run, to get away, but I couldn't. I couldn't look away. The soldier took a slow step forward, his feet dragging across the ground, the sound of his boots scraping against the concrete louder than any footsteps I'd ever heard. "You're not supposed to be here," he said, his voice barely a whisper. It was the same voice I'd heard in my head, the one that had warned me earlier. The air around me felt colder, suffocating, as if the world had gone still and heavy. I wanted to scream, to fight, but no sound came out. It was like my body had become a puppet, and I was no longer in control. The soldier took another step forward, and I backed away, my feet stumbling over themselves. I was trapped, the walls of the barracks pressing in on me. The door was behind me, but I couldn't get to it. I couldn't escape. "You should have listened," the soldier murmured. He reached out with a hand that was unnaturally long, his fingers clawed and twisted. "It's too late now." Before I could react, the soldier lunged at me, his hands closing around my throat with a strength that felt unnatural. His grip was ice cold, like his skin wasn't even real. I gasped for air, my vision blurring as I fought to break free, but his fingers only tightened, pulling me closer, his breath hot and stale on my face. The world started to spin, my thoughts disjointed, and I could feel the edges of consciousness slipping away. But just as I was about to lose all sense of reality, something pulled me back. A voice. Not the soldier's. It was a familiar voice. "Sergeant Davis. Get out of there. Now!" I blinked, trying to focus, trying to make sense of what was happening. The soldier's grip loosened slightly as I turned toward the voice. It was coming from outside, from the other side of the building. Without thinking, I shoved the soldier away and sprinted for the door. My legs felt like lead, my lungs burning with each desperate breath, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. When I reached the door and flung it open, I was met with the sight of Sergeant Davis standing in the yard. But something was wrong. His face was pale, his eyes hollow. He looked empty, like he was just a shell of the person he used to be. "You should have left when you had the chance, Ethan," he said, his voice low and cold. "Now, it's too late." Before I could ask what he meant, something moved in the corner of my eye. I turned, my heart nearly stopping. It wasn't just Davis. There were more. Figures. Soldiers. Dozens of them. All standing just outside the base, standing in the shadows. Their faces were as empty as Davis's, their eyes black and lifeless, their bodies still. They were waiting. Watching. I felt my mind begin to unravel as I realized what was happening. They weren't here to help. They weren't here to rescue me. They were here to take me. I turned and ran, not knowing where I was going, just running. My breath came in ragged gasps, my mind spinning with fear. I couldn't understand it. I couldn't comprehend how this could be real. But it was. The soldiers, they were dead. But somehow, they were still here, still trapped in this place. And now, so was I. I ran and ran until my legs gave out. I collapsed by the main gate, my chest heaving, but I didn't stop looking over my shoulder. Every shadow seemed to shift, every noise in the wind sounded like footsteps. I don't know how long I stayed there. Hours, maybe. Or minutes. Time didn't matter anymore. The soldiers never left. I never left. My name's Corporal Ethan Davis, and I've been stationed at Fort Sullivan for nearly a year now. It's a small, isolated base nestled in the middle of a vast, unforgiving stretch of land surrounded by dense woods, far from civilization. You might think that after a year of training, drills, and late-night guard shifts, I'd be used to the routine. But you'd be wrong. There's something about this place. I can't quite explain it, but it's always felt off, like the base itself is holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The walls are old, the floors creak underfoot, and the air always smells faintly of dust and oil. The soldiers here are a tight-knit group, but there's a quiet unease among us, like we're all waiting for something that we don't really want to know about. It was a Tuesday, just like any other. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the base. I had just finished my patrol and was heading back to the barracks, ready to clock out for the night. As I walked down the narrow hallway toward the main entrance, I noticed that the lights in the common area were flickering. Nothing unusual, just another sign that this place was falling apart. But then, as I passed the storage room near the end of the hall, I heard something. A noise. Soft but unmistakable. A scraping sound, like metal dragging against concrete. At first, I figured it was just one of the other guys, probably Jones, one of the techs, working late on some equipment. But the sound came again, louder this time, and closer. My instincts kicked in. I'm not one to jump at shadows, but something about that noise unsettled me. I stopped in my tracks and listened, trying to make sense of it. The sound seemed to be coming from the storage room, but the door was shut tight. I could feel my heart rate picking up, my palms growing damp as I stepped closer. "Jones?" I called out softly, trying to keep my voice steady. There was no response, just silence. I wasn't sure why, but I found myself reaching for the doorknob, turning it slowly, my pulse hammering in my throat. When the door creaked open, I half expected to find Jones hunched over a workbench, fiddling with some equipment. But that's not what I saw. The room was empty. It was dark, except for the dim light filtering in from the hallway, and yet the scraping sound persisted. But it wasn't coming from anywhere in the room. It was coming from beneath the floor. I stared at the ground, my mind racing. There was a hatch near the far wall, one I had never paid much attention to before. It was old, rusted, like something that hadn't been opened in years. And the sound it was coming from down there. I backed away slowly, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. The sensation of being watched was overwhelming. I was alone, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was hiding in the shadows, waiting. I should have left right then. But I didn't. I don't know what possessed me to approach that hatch, but I found myself crouching in front of it. My fingers hovered over the rusty latch, trembling. The scraping sound had stopped, but I could still feel the oppressive weight of silence pressing down on me. I unlatched the hatch. The smell that hit me first was the worst part. It was thick, damp, and rancid, like something had been rotting for a long time. The darkness beyond the hatch seemed to swallow the light from the hallway, and my stomach twisted in revolt. I didn't want to look. I should have walked away. But the curiosity, it pulled me in. I crouched lower, peering into the blackness below. I couldn't see much, but I could hear something moving down there. And then, I saw it. A shape, just out of the reach of the dim light, shuffling slowly across the floor. It was hunched, its limbs long and unnatural. My breath hitched in my throat, and I stood up, heart racing in panic. Before I could react, I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate steps, like someone was approaching, but no one was there. I spun around, but the hallway was empty. I wasn't alone. My pulse thudded in my ears as I slammed the hatch shut, my mind racing. I had to get out of there. But before I could make it back to the door, a voice broke the silence. Ethan. It was my name, but it wasn't coming from anywhere nearby. It was coming from the storage room, or from below the floor. My legs froze. The voice was familiar but wrong, distorted in a way I couldn't explain. My breath caught and I turned, stumbling toward the door. I didn't look back. I barely made it to the barracks before I saw Jones. He was standing by the entrance, waiting for me. His face was pale, his expression tense. "Hey, Davis," he called. "You all right?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. Instead, I just nodded and kept walking. Something was wrong here. Something had been wrong for a while. That night, I barely slept. My mind kept replaying the image of that hatch, of that thing moving in the dark beneath the base. But the next morning, things only got worse. The next morning, I was still shaken. I could barely focus during the daily briefing. The image of that thing lurking beneath the floor, eating away at my thoughts. The voice, familiar but twisted, kept echoing in my head. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever I had glimpsed, whatever was hiding down there, wasn't something meant to be found. I tried to keep myself busy, staying on the move, just to keep my mind occupied. But it wasn't working. The unease that had settled in the pit of my stomach was like a stone that wouldn't go away. By mid-afternoon, the unease turned to something darker. It was a quiet day on base, the kind of day where nothing much happens and the hours drag on. But then I got a call from Sergeant Holt. "Davis, we need you to head over to the motor pool," he said. "Something's been acting up with one of the trucks." I barely had time to respond before he hung up. I sighed, grabbed my gear, and made my way over to the motor pool. When I arrived, I was greeted by the sight of the truck, a military transport vehicle parked in the same spot it had been in for the past few days. There was nothing particularly wrong with it at first glance, but as I stepped closer, I noticed something strange. The hood of the truck was warm to the touch, like it had been running recently. But no one had been in here, not since the shift ended. I was about to inspect the engine when I heard something, a voice. This time, it wasn't a whisper. It was a shout. "Help me, please." I froze. The voice was unmistakable. It was Jones. I immediately spun around, scanning the area. The motor pool was empty, no sign of anyone. The place was quiet, save for the low hum of the bass in the distance. "Jones?" I called out, my voice tight with fear. "Jones, where are you?" The voice came again, desperate, pleading. This time, it was followed by a faint scratching sound, just like the one I had heard in the storage room the night before. I didn't think. I just ran toward the source of the sound, my feet pounding against the concrete floor. It led me back toward the storage room, the one I had tried to avoid all day. My heart raced as I approached the door. I didn't want to go back down there, but I couldn't ignore it. I had to know what was happening. The door creaked open, and I stepped inside, my breath shallow and uneven. The air was damp, thick with an unsettling stillness. The storage room was empty, at least, it seemed that way. The shadows seemed to stretch and twist unnaturally like they were alive. But then, from the far corner of the room, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. A trapdoor smaller than the hatch I had seen earlier, but similar in design. It was partially open, and the scraping sound I had heard was louder now. I hesitated, but something darker than fear urged me forward. I moved closer, feeling the temperature drop as I crouched down to examine the door. It was cold to the touch, colder than the air around it. My hands trembled as I reached for the latch. Before I could open it fully, I heard a loud bang from above. Footsteps. Someone was coming. I quickly slammed the trapdoor shut, my pulse racing. I didn't know why I didn't leave, why I didn't just run, but I couldn't. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being pulled deeper into whatever was happening at this base. The footsteps grew louder. I looked around the room frantically, but there was nowhere to hide. I was trapped. Then, the door burst open. Sergeant Holt was standing in the doorway, his eyes wide and bloodshot, his face pale. "Davis," he gasped, voice hoarse. "You shouldn't be down here. Get out. Now." I didn't question him. I didn't need to. The urgency in his voice told me everything I needed to know. But just as I turned to follow him, I heard a voice, a whisper, the same voice I had heard last night in the storage room. "Ethan." I spun around, but Holt had already turned, walking quickly back down the hall. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shout, but my throat was tight. The voice called again, closer now. "Ethan." I took a step toward the voice. My mind screamed at me to stop, but my body moved of its own accord. It was like a magnet pulling me in. I was powerless to resist. I turned the corner of the hallway, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The walls were closer now, the air thick with a nauseating sense of dread. I reached the storage room again, but this time, it wasn't the same. The door was wide open. Inside I could hear movement, but there was no one there. The darkness was deeper than before, like it was waiting. I stepped inside, my hands trembling as I fumbled for the light switch. The light flickered to life, but only for a moment. The shadows seemed to move. That's when I saw it. Jones, or at least, what had been Jones. His body was stretched and contorted, his skin pale and slick with sweat. His eyes were wide, unblinking, but they didn't seem to be seeing me. His mouth was open, but no sound came out. He was on his hands and knees, his back arched at an unnatural angle. And then the thing behind him moved. I could see it now. The figure in the dark. It was hunched, like something that didn't belong in this world. Its body was thin, skeletal, with patches of grayish, decayed skin. Its arms were long, too long, ending in fingers that scraped the floor like claws. "Ethan," the thing whispered again, its voice a horrible imitation of Jones's. I didn't know what it was, but I couldn't stay. I couldn't be here. I turned and ran, my feet slamming against the floor, heart hammering in my chest. I had to get out. But when I reached the hallway, everything was different. The walls were closing in, the hallway stretching longer and longer, the sound of my footsteps distorted in my ears. I couldn't find the exit. I couldn't find the way out. The voice followed me, growing louder. "Ethan." I could feel its presence behind me, its breath on my neck. The door to the barracks was just ahead, but it felt miles away. I reached the door, my hand trembling as I pushed it open. And then I saw it. Jones's face pressed up against the window of the barracks, his eyes wide and hollow, staring into mine. The door slammed shut behind me. I didn't escape. And whatever that thing is, it's still out there. My name is Jack, and I still don't know what happened at that base. I don't know if I'm losing my mind or if I really did see something I shouldn't have. But I can tell you this, everything changed after that night. I haven't been able to shake the feeling that I'm still being watched, like something is waiting for me to make a mistake. I joined the military right out of high school, eager to serve, ready for whatever they had in store. I was assigned to a remote base in the Beckett Mountains, not the kind you see in movies, but a real, quiet outpost. It wasn't glamorous by any means, just rows of barracks and a few rundown buildings tucked into the woods. A place where you could be forgotten by the outside world. I wasn't there long before I realized something was wrong. It started on my first week during a routine briefing. Sergeant Miller was giving us a rundown of our duties, mostly just security patrols and maintenance checks on the equipment, standard stuff. But then he added something odd. "Don't go near Building 6 after dark," Miller said, his eyes briefly meeting mine. "Not unless you're told. It's off limits for a reason." I thought nothing of it. It wasn't the first time I'd heard a warning like that. Every base has its secrets. Maybe it was some kind of sensitive area, or maybe it was just the general paranoia that came with being stationed in such an isolated place. I wasn't curious, or at least, I didn't think I was. That night, though, something felt off. I was assigned to the night shift for the first time. It was quiet, almost too quiet. The usual hum of the generators was missing, replaced by a suffocating silence that made the whole base feel wrong. I'd done my patrols around the perimeter, checked the lights, made sure everything was locked down, but there was something in the air, something unsettling that I couldn't put my finger on. As I passed by Building 6, I glanced over at it. The door was slightly ajar. I knew I wasn't supposed to go inside, but curiosity gnawed at me. The door had never been left open before. I told myself it was probably just a mistake, some soldier in a hurry. Still, I couldn't stop staring at it, that thin gap between the door and the frame. The darkness inside was almost welcoming, like it was waiting for me. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, frozen in place. I should have walked away. I should have reported it to someone and moved on. But instead, I found myself stepping toward the door, my hand reaching for the handle. The second I touched it, the air around me seemed to shift. It wasn't cold, but it felt thick, like something was pressing against my chest. I hesitated, pulling my hand back, telling myself I was being stupid. But something inside me told me to just look. I pushed the door open, just a little. The interior of Building 6 was completely dark, save for a single flickering light at the far end. I couldn't make out much, but I could see enough. There were shelves lined with boxes, equipment scattered across the floor. It looked like any other storage room, except for the strange feeling of something watching me. I didn't know how to explain it, but the air was charged with a kind of tension that made every muscle in my body tighten. That's when I heard the whisper. It wasn't loud, just a faint murmur, almost drowned out by the beating of my heart. "Get out!" The voice was so quiet, so far away, that I almost thought I'd imagined it. But it was real. It came from deeper in the building, from somewhere just beyond the reach of the light. I didn't wait to hear it again. I slammed the door shut and bolted down the hall, my breath coming in short gasps. I couldn't explain what I'd just heard, but I knew something was wrong. The next day, I was on patrol again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was always just out of sight. I kept seeing shadows flicker in the corners of my vision, and every time I turned around, there was nothing there. The building, the whole base, felt wrong. I started second-guessing myself, wondering if I was just tired or if I had imagined everything. It wasn't until a few days later that I saw something that made me question my sanity. I was walking past Building 6 again, this time on a routine check. The door was open again. Not wide, just a crack, like before. But this time I didn't hesitate. My curiosity got the better of me, and I stepped inside. The room was completely different from the last time I'd seen it. The shelves were gone. There was only a large table in the middle of the room, covered in what looked like papers. I didn't get too close at first. I didn't want to risk being caught, but something about the papers caught my eye. They weren't just regular reports or documents, they were old. The kind of paper that crumbles at the touch, yellowed with age. But the strangest thing was the writing. It wasn't in English. It wasn't even in a language I recognized. The letters were jagged, twisted, like someone had scratched them into the paper with a knife. As I stared at them, I felt a growing sense of dread. My skin prickled, and I could almost feel the temperature drop. I had to leave. I knew I shouldn't have gone inside. I knew I shouldn't have touched anything, but I couldn't stop myself. I reached out and touched the paper, and that's when the room went dark. Not just the lights flickering or the shadows shifting dark. Complete, suffocating darkness. It felt like the world had just vanished. Like I wasn't even on the base anymore. I panicked, pulling my hand back, stumbling toward the door, but the darkness seemed to follow me, wrapping around me like a heavy fog. "Leave!" It was the voice again, only this time, it wasn't just a whisper. It was louder, more forceful, as though it was coming from all around me. I ran out of that building so fast I didn't even stop to think. My heart was pounding, my legs shaking. I didn't know what had just happened, but I knew I had crossed a line. I wasn't supposed to know what they were doing in there. I wasn't supposed to see any of it. But the worst part wasn't what I'd seen. It was that I wasn't alone. As I ran out of the building, I caught sight of someone standing in the shadows at the end of the hall. A figure, cloaked in darkness, watching me. I couldn't make out any details. I couldn't even see its face. Just the silhouette of someone standing, motionless, unmoving. I should have screamed, but the words wouldn't come. I should have run, but I just stood there, staring, frozen by the figure's gaze. And then, in the blink of an eye, it was gone. I couldn't find the words. I couldn't explain what had just happened, but I knew one thing for certain. Something was wrong with this base. Something that shouldn't be here. Something that wasn't supposed to be here. I didn't stay another night. That's what I keep telling myself, but it feels like a lie. I left the base, sure, but that thing, that feeling, it's still with me. I still hear it sometimes, that voice, whispering to me in the dead of night. After I ran out of Building 6, I did the only thing I could think of. I reported what happened. I told Sergeant Miller everything, the voice, the strange papers, the figure in the dark. At first, he didn't believe me. He brushed it off, told me I was probably just tired from the long hours, that the isolation was getting to me. But something in his eyes changed when I mentioned the writing. The look he gave me, it was a mixture of fear and something else, something I couldn't name. It wasn't until the next day that things started to spiral out of control. Miller called me into his office that afternoon. His face was pale, the kind of pale that comes from knowing something you wish you didn't. He didn't ask me any questions this time. He just handed me a file. "Take a look," he said. I opened the file, my hands trembling. It was filled with reports, but nothing like the usual military paperwork I was used to. These were different. The handwriting, the symbols. It was the same writing I'd seen on the papers in Building 6, but this time I could understand some of it. Words, phrases, snippets of sentences started to make sense as I read, though not in the way they should have. I knew the meaning behind the words, but they felt wrong, like something had shifted inside me when I read them. The words on the page didn't seem to make sense. They talked about experiments, tests, things I couldn't begin to comprehend. There were mentions of subjects, conduits, and something about opening the door. The more I read, the more confused and terrified I became. These weren't just records of routine operations. These were projects. Projects that had no business being done on a military base. And it got worse. In the margins of the papers, written in the same jagged handwriting, were messages. Little notes scribbled hastily between the lines, like someone was trying to tell me something. They were almost too disturbing to read. They know you're looking. It's too late for you now. They'll come for you. I slammed the file shut, a cold sweat running down my back. The room was suddenly too hot, the air suffocating. I didn't know what to make of it. I wanted to shout at Miller, ask him what the hell was going on, but he just stood there, his eyes fixed on me, waiting for me to say something. But I couldn't. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Miller spoke. "They were never supposed to know you were involved," he said, his voice low, barely above a whisper. "They'll come for you now. You've seen too much. You're a liability." My heart stopped. What do you mean? What do you mean they'll come for me?" But Miller didn't answer. Instead, he just reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small envelope, sealing it and handing it to me without saying another word. I opened it and my stomach dropped. Inside was a photo. It was me, but not like I'd seen myself. The picture was taken from behind, a figure standing in the doorway of Building 6, just as I'd seen the figure watching me. I was there, my back turned, walking toward the building like I was being led in by something. I couldn't see, and in the distance, almost imperceptible in the shadows, a pair of eyes. I couldn't breathe. It felt like the room was closing in on me, like I was suffocating under the weight of something far beyond my understanding. "They're watching you," Miller said, his voice thick with fear. "And they won't stop until they've erased everything, you know. You need to leave. Now." I didn't ask any more questions. I grabbed my things, got in my truck, and left. I didn't care about protocol. I didn't care about orders. I just needed to get away from that place. But when I drove away from the base, the sense of being watched didn't leave. The feeling followed me. I thought it was paranoia. I thought I'd just been spooked by what I saw in that file. I thought I could shake it off, get back to normal. But the more I tried to ignore it, the more it ate at me. I kept looking over my shoulder. The shadows seemed deeper than they should have been. The trees along the road were too still. And I couldn't stop thinking about that figure I'd seen in the doorway of Building 6, the one with the hollow eyes, watching me. It didn't make sense. I should have just kept driving. But something pulled me back. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still in the base, waiting. So, a week later, I went back. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't want anyone to know. But something in me, something I couldn't control, made me turn the truck around and head back to the base. When I arrived, I parked at the edge of the property, far from the main entrance. I sat there for a while, trying to gather the courage to step out, and then I heard it, a voice. It wasn't a whisper. It was loud, clear, and it came from somewhere deep within the base. "You shouldn't have come back." I turned the key in the ignition, heart racing, but something held me in place. I looked at the base, at the dark silhouette of Building 6 standing against the Creditas. Night sky. I knew I shouldn't go back inside. I knew I had already seen too much, but the pull was too strong. The curiosity, the need to understand. I got out of the truck and walked toward the gate, but when I reached it, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The gate was open. I hadn't touched it. No one else had passed through. The darkness beyond the gate seemed to stretch on forever, pulling me toward it. That's when I realized I wasn't alone. Something inside the base was waiting for me. And it wasn't just the figure I had seen. It was something far worse, something that had been expecting me. And now, I had no way of leaving. My name is Lieutenant Tom Harding, and I've been stationed at Camp Vance for just over 6 months now. It's a small military base, tucked away in the woods, miles from any major city. Most people haven't even heard of it. That's fine by me. The isolation here gives me a sense of calm, and it's easier to focus without the distractions of the world outside. The air is always crisp, the trees thick and unyielding, and the only noise comes from the hum of the generators or the distant sounds of drills. I'm not gonna lie, there are days when I miss the hustle of bigger bases, where things feel alive and full of energy. But there's something oddly comforting about the quiet here. We don't get many visitors, and the soldiers stationed here tend to keep to themselves. The days are structured: wake up early, run drills, maintain the equipment, eat, sleep, repeat. The usual stuff. Everything feels routine. At least it did until a few days ago. I was sitting in my office when I first heard the announcement. It came over the loudspeaker, one of those deep, robotic voices that gives you a sense of unease no matter what it's saying. Normally they'd call out something like, "Report to your posts," or "It's time for PT." But this time, the message was different. Attention, all personnel. Base-wide lockdown in effect. Secure your stations immediately. Do not leave your assigned areas until further notice. There was a brief pause, and then the message repeated. It wasn't the usual drill. The tone was strange, urgent. I could hear a slight quiver in the voice, as if the speaker knew something the rest of us didn't. I immediately stood up, my heart thudding in my chest. Lockdowns weren't that uncommon, something about a potential security breach or an external threat, but the way this was handled was different. The sense of unease settled over me like a heavy blanket. I grabbed my radio and called for Sergeant Collins, the senior officer on duty. No response. I tried again. Nothing. The air in the base had shifted, a palpable tension filling every room. I quickly grabbed my gear and left my office, heading down the dimly lit corridor toward the barracks. The base was eerily quiet, no chatter, no laughter, no footsteps echoing off the walls like usual. Just silence. As I walked past the mess hall, I glanced inside. The lights were on, but the room was completely empty. The kitchen staff should have been preparing dinner, but the stoves were cold. I felt a shiver run down my spine. Where was everyone? I jogged toward the armory, where I knew the soldiers should be gathering in case there was a threat. But when I pushed open the door, I was met with an unsettling sight. The armory was locked. And there, just beyond the window, I could see one of the younger soldiers, Private Williams, standing rigidly still. His face was pale, and his eyes were wide. He was staring at something in the distance, unmoving. "Williams," I shouted, but he didn't react, not even a blink. I pressed my hand to the glass, feeling the cold of the metal against my palm. "Williams!" I shouted again, but still, he didn't respond. My gut twisted with a sense of dread, and I stepped back, not wanting to provoke whatever had his attention. I turned, on my heel, and moved down the hall toward the control room, hoping to get some answers from whoever was monitoring the lockdown. When I entered the control room, it was even worse. The monitors were all flashing red, showing no feed from any of the security cameras, as if someone had purposefully cut the power. There was no sign of the command staff either, just the cold, empty room. I grabbed the nearest radio, trying to make contact with anyone on the base, but only static responded. Then, I heard something behind me, a low, guttural sound. It was faint at first, but as I turned around, it grew louder, as if something was moving through the walls themselves. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I tried to shake off the sense of unease, but I couldn't. Something was wrong. Something was terribly wrong. The low growl reverberated through the room, and the air around me grew thick. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees, and I could see my breath fogging in front of me. I swallowed hard, reaching for the gun at my side, and moved cautiously toward the door. That's when the lights flickered, and I heard a voice, barely audible over the static. "Leave now." It wasn't anyone from the base. It wasn't even human. I stumbled back, my mind racing. I had to get out. I had to get back to my unit, back to the barracks. The lockdown had to be some kind of drill, a misunderstanding. But the longer I stood there, the more I realized something wasn't adding up. The voice, the growl, the unnatural cold. I turned toward the door, but before I could make it to the exit, the lights went out completely. Darkness. I fumbled for my flashlight, the only thing I had that might help. When I clicked it on, the beam barely cut through the thick blackness. But it was enough to see a figure standing at the far end of the room, motionless. It was one of the soldiers. But his face, It wasn't his face anymore. His eyes were wide, unblinking, staring straight through me. His mouth was open, lips peeled back in a grotesque snarl. His body was twisted in ways it shouldn't have been, like something that had been bent and pulled too many times. The light flickered, casting long shadows on the walls, and in those shadows, more figures appeared. And they weren't human. I turned and bolted for the door. I didn't care what was happening, didn't care if it was a drill or a security breach. I just needed to get out. But when I pushed open the door, the hallway was different. The walls were closing in, narrowing in on me. The familiar, safe corridors of the base felt alien now, like I was somewhere I didn't belong. I ran faster, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts, but the further I went, the further the walls seemed to stretch. I was trapped, and whatever was hunting me, whatever had taken over this base, was getting closer. I kept running, my feet pounding against the cold concrete floor, but no matter how fast I moved, the hallway seemed to stretch endlessly before me. The familiar bends and turns in the base that I knew like the back of my hand were gone. The walls closed in on me, and the air felt suffocating, as if I were running in a tunnel that had no end. My flashlight flickered intermittently, casting long, sharp shadows that seemed to move on their own. I glanced behind me, half expecting to see something following, but the hallway was empty, too empty. The footsteps of my own boots echoed off the walls, but there were no other sounds, no signs of life, no movement, just silence, thick and heavy, like the base itself was holding its breath. I stopped for a moment to try and gather myself, to figure out what to do. Sweat dripped down my forehead, and my heart was racing. The fear in my chest was palpable, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't just stand there, waiting for whatever was hunting me to find me. The radio at my side crackled to life again. The voice that came through was faint, distant, and distorted, as if it were coming from the bottom of a well. "Ethan, you shouldn't be here." It was the same voice. Low, cold, wrong. My blood ran cold, and I stumbled backward, trying to move away from the oppressive voice that felt like it was coming from the walls themselves. How did it know my name? The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I shook my head, trying to clear the fear that had taken root in my mind. I didn't have time for this. I needed to keep moving. I had to get to the control room, to find someone, anyone who could explain what was happening. I turned down another corridor, hoping to find an exit, but instead, I found something worse. The door at the end of the hall was open, just slightly, and through the crack, I saw something moving, the faintest glimpse of a figure. I hesitated. My instinct told me to keep running, to get away from whatever that was, but curiosity tugged at me. I had to know if it was one of the soldiers, if there was someone still alive on this base. I needed answers. I crept forward, trying to stay as quiet as possible. My breath came in ragged gasps, and the flashlight trembled in my hand. The shadows seemed to bend around the doorframe as I pushed it open just a little wider. What I saw made my stomach turn. In the center of the room, there was a soldier. At first, I thought it was one of my own, but then I saw his face, or what was left of it. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, but there was no recognition in them. His skin was pale, stretched thin across his skull, and his lips were cracked and dry, as if he hadn't spoken in days. His body was contorted in a way that didn't seem possible. He was standing, but his legs were bent at unnatural angles, like he was being forced to stand against his will. And then, just as I thought it couldn't get worse, he moved. His head jerked to the side, and his neck made a sickening crack. He turned toward me, his mouth opening in a horrible, silent scream. But nothing came out. His eyes were locked on mine, empty of any human emotion. I stumbled back, my heart racing. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my feet felt frozen. I couldn't tear my eyes away from that awful, twisted figure. Then I heard its footsteps from behind me. Heavy, deliberate steps, as if someone or something was walking slowly toward me. I spun around, but there was nothing there, just the empty hallway. I took a step back, then another, the pounding of my heart in my ears louder than anything else. The air was thick, suffocating. That's when I saw it, the figure at the end of the hall. At first, I thought it was another soldier, but the more I looked, the more wrong it seemed. The way it moved, unnaturally jerky, as if it was forcing itself forward. Its limbs stretched too long, its face blank, devoid of expression, but the eyes, God. The eyes were wide open, staring at me like they were trying to pierce into my soul. I turned and ran, my boots sliding on the slick floor, my body screaming in protest, but I couldn't stop. I had to get away. I rounded a corner and nearly collided with another figure, this one closer. Much too close. It was one of the soldiers, or rather, what had once been a soldier. His uniform was torn, his face mangled, and his eyes were hollow, empty. I didn't have time to process it before he grabbed me. His fingers were cold, too cold, and when he gripped my arm, I felt an icy shock shoot through my body. His grip tightened, pulling me closer, and for a moment, I thought he was going to drag me down with him into whatever hell he had come from. I fought back, using every ounce of strength to free myself. My heart was pounding in my chest, my vision narrowing, but I couldn't break free. It was like his grip was made of steel, like he wasn't even human anymore. Just as I was about to scream, a loud noise echoed through the hallway, a bang so violent it shook the walls. The soldier dropped me, his body stiffening as if struck by some invisible force. He fell backward, twitching on the floor. I didn't wait. I ran again, not looking back. I didn't want to know what had just happened. I couldn't stay there. I couldn't be part of whatever nightmare was unfolding inside this base. I reached the control room, but when I barged through the door, the room was empty. The monitors were all black, the radios silent. But the air, it was thick, buzzing with a strange energy, like the building itself was holding its breath. That's when I saw it, the figure standing in the corner of the room, watching me. The same eyes, the same blank face. This time, I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. It raised a hand, a twisted skeletal thing, and pointed directly at me. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything, but my body was frozen. The air was too thick, the weight of whatever was happening too overwhelming. I heard the voice again, but this time it wasn't coming from the walls or the radio. It was in my head. "You're already too late." The lights flickered, and the figure stepped forward. I didn't know if I would make it out alive. I didn't know if anyone else on this base was still alive. But one thing was certain. Whatever had happened here, whatever had taken control of this place, was far from over. And I was trapped. I never thought much about the late-night shifts at the base. As a private in the Army, I've seen my fair share of mundane tasks. Checking the perimeter, ensuring the equipment is in order, and making sure nothing goes wrong in the dead of night. Camp Marshall wasn't the kind of place where things happened, at least not anything exciting. It was a small, remote base, nestled deep in the woods, far from any city, any hustle, any distractions. Most nights, the only sounds I heard were the distant hum of the generator and the occasional rustling of the trees. Perfect for someone like me who just wanted a job and a paycheck. The night I'm talking about started like any other. I was on guard duty, assigned to the east perimeter of the base. My buddy David was supposed to be on the west side, but he'd gotten sick earlier that day, so they pulled me in for a double shift. No big deal. I was used to being out there, walking the lonely trail that led around the edge of the base, shining my flashlight on the trees and occasionally checking the gate. The air was crisp, biting at my skin, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Still, there was something about that night, something in the way the wind sounded against the trees. It was too quiet, too still. The first thing that felt off was the fog. It rolled in slowly, creeping over the ground like a thick blanket. I couldn't see past a few feet in front of me, which made the night feel even more oppressive. I told myself it was normal, nothing to worry about. After all, it wasn't the first time I'd been out in fog like this. But it didn't feel the same. It was heavier, colder. As if the fog itself was watching me, waiting. Around 2 a.m., I decided to make my usual round toward the main building. I checked the gate locked, no signs of tampering, and then I heard it. A low thud, like something heavy being dropped, coming from the woods to the north. At first, I thought it was an animal. Maybe a deer, maybe a bear, though I had never seen one that close to the base. I stood still, listening. The thud came again, but this time it was followed by a strange dragging sound, like something being pulled across the ground. My heart rate kicked up a notch. Must be some animal, I muttered to myself, trying to shake off the discomfort crawling up my spine, but my instincts were telling me otherwise. Something was wrong. The sound didn't stop. It wasn't natural. I pulled my flashlight out, pointing it in the direction of the noise. The beam sliced through the thick fog, illuminating nothing but the shadowy silhouettes of the trees. I took a cautious step forward, my boots crunching on the gravel path. That's when I heard the voice. It was soft, too soft at first, like a whisper just outside my hearing. Then, clearer. "Help, please." I froze. My body went cold, my breath catching in my throat. The voice was unmistakable, it was human, but it was low, strained, like someone in pain. Someone calling for help. For a moment I stood there, trying to convince myself that I was just hearing things. Maybe it was the wind, or maybe the fog was playing tricks on my mind. But then it came again, this time louder. "Help me." It wasn't coming from far away either. It was close, too close. Without thinking, I started walking toward the sound. My steps felt sluggish, like my body didn't want to obey my mind. The voice kept repeating, and the dragging sound intensified, like something or someone was being pulled across the ground. I reached the tree line and stopped. The fog was so thick now that I couldn't see more than a few feet ahead of me. The voice was still there, now mingled with low, guttural sounds, like something choking or gasping for air. I felt my heart pounding in my chest, and for a moment I considered turning back. But I couldn't. I had to know what it was. I took another step into the fog. My flashlight flickered once, then stayed on, casting eerie shadows on the trees. That's when I saw something. A figure, hunched over in the distance. It was standing still, and as I drew closer, I saw that it was dragging its feet along the ground, leaving a trail behind it. The figure's back was arched at an unnatural angle, like it was moving with extreme discomfort. "Hey!" I called out, my voice shaking despite my best effort. "Are you okay?" There was no response, just the dragging sound and the figure slowly moving away from me, further into the fog. I could feel my pulse in my ears now, the adrenaline kicking in. Something wasn't right. I should have turned back, but I didn't. I stepped forward again, the beam of my flashlight now trained on the figure. As I got closer, I saw that it wasn't walking normally at all. Its body was twisted, its arms hanging loosely at its sides. The figure's face, I couldn't make it out at first, but then the fog shifted just enough for me to see it. It wasn't human. The face was pale, sickly looking, with wide, unblinking eyes staring straight at me. Its mouth was open, but it didn't make a sound. And then, I noticed something even worse. The figure's legs weren't properly formed. They were bent backward at the knee, twisting unnaturally, dragging along the ground. My stomach turned. The dragging sound wasn't just the figure's movement, it was the sound of its limbs scraping against the earth. I froze. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. The thing's eyes locked onto mine, and for a second, I thought I saw something behind those eyes. Something dark, something that wanted me. Then, without warning, the thing lunged at me. I barely managed to step back in time, my heart thundering as I stumbled and fell onto the ground. The creature, if you could even call it that, moved quickly. Too quickly for something that should have been so broken. Its mouth opened wider, its jagged teeth gleaming in the dim light. I scrambled to my feet, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I turned and ran, tearing through the fog, not daring to look behind me. My only thought was to get away, to get back to the safety of the base. I didn't stop until I was back at the perimeter gate, my body shaking with fear. I leaned against the cold metal fence, gasping for air, my heart still racing. But the fog remained, thick and heavy, surrounding the entire base. It was like the night was swallowing me whole. I thought I had outrun it. But as I caught my breath and turned back toward the base, I saw something in the distance. Another figure, standing at the far edge of the fog. And this time, it wasn't alone. I froze at the edge of the gate, my heart thundering in my chest. The figure in the distance was tall, but it wasn't moving. It just stood there, an indistinct shadow against the thick fog. I couldn't make out any details from this far away, but the dread that filled me was unmistakable. The same feeling, the same wrongness that had gripped me when I first heard the voice. The fog shifted again, swirling unnaturally around the figure, but it didn't move. It was like it was waiting for me to make the next move, and for a moment, I felt trapped, both physically and mentally. I was supposed to be guarding the perimeter, watching for threats, but what I had seen out there, it wasn't a threat I could fight, wasn't something I could control. I didn't know what it was, but I knew it wasn't something I was meant to confront. I should have run. I should have bolted back into the base and locked every door behind me, but I didn't. Instead, I stood there, my flashlight trembling in my hand, shining weakly toward the figure. The beam was too dim, swallowed by the fog, and it couldn't cut through the heavy weight of fear that was settling over me. The figure hadn't moved, but I felt its presence, like it was drawing closer, even though it was standing still. And then, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Two more figures appeared, just beyond the first. They were taller than the first one, moving slowly, as if they were made of the fog itself. I backed up instinctively, pressing myself against the metal gate, trying to hold my ground, but I couldn't. My feet betrayed me, and I stumbled backward toward the guard post. The figures were closer now, their features becoming clearer, and I could see their eyes empty, hollow, black. The kind of eyes you see in nightmares, the kind that don't blink, don't show any sign of life. God, no, I whispered to myself, stepping backward in a daze. This can't be real. But it was real. It had to be. The silence was suffocating now, broken only by the sound of my ragged breathing. I had to think. I had to do something. I couldn't let them get any closer, couldn't let them reach the base. I scrambled for the radio on my belt, fumbling with it, but when I clicked the button to call for backup, there was nothing. No crackling, no static, nothing, just dead air. I swore under my breath and tried again. Still nothing. The radio was useless. The fog felt thicker now, more suffocating, and I realized that whatever was happening, whatever had been stalking the base, it wasn't just in the woods. It had already reached the perimeter. It was already here. The figures were closing in. I couldn't run. I couldn't stay. And then, a voice. The voice came again, this time not from the woods or the figures. This time, it was in my head. It wasn't a whisper. It was clear, commanding, and cold. Leave. I spun around, looking wildly for the source, but the voice had no physical form. It wasn't coming from anyone standing before me. It wasn't coming from any human at all. My legs shook as I turned back to the figures. They had moved. They were closer now, only a few feet away, their hollow eyes boring into me, their mouths open, wide, and void-like. Please, the voice again, now more urgent. You shouldn't be here. I stumbled backward, my body refusing to move any faster, my mind frozen with terror. The figure at the front of the group took a slow step forward, and that's when I noticed something even worse. The skin. It was wrong. It wasn't just pale or gray. It was torn, jagged, as if it had been shredded and then stitched back together. The stitching wasn't neat, it was sloppy, like someone or something had put it together in a hurry. And underneath the skin, the muscles bulged unnaturally, as if the body was trying to break free from its own form. The sight sent waves of nausea rolling through me, but I couldn't look. Away. I was paralyzed by it. And then I saw it. The last thing I wanted to see. The thing the creature reached into the fog behind it and pulled something out. At first, I couldn't tell what it was. It looked like a bundle of rags, but then it moved. The rags shifted, and I saw the shape beneath them, a body. It was one of the soldiers from the base, but it wasn't alive. The body was barely recognizable, its face stretched in a silent scream, the eyes wide and unblinking, and its limbs bent and twisted in unnatural ways hung limp from its sides. The creature held it with one arm, dragging it like a lifeless rag doll. My stomach lurched, and I stepped back again, but this time, the ground behind me shifted. The base, it wasn't solid. The floor beneath my feet seemed to twist, like the earth itself was pulling me into it. The shadows from the fog seemed to move of their own accord, creeping closer, closing off any escape. Get inside, the voice inside my head growled, and this time, it wasn't a request. It was an order. But it was too late. The figures were all around me now, blocking the path to the base. The one in front reached out, its hand twisted and deformed, fingers stretched far too long, and before I could react, it gripped my arm. Its skin was cold, almost like ice, and the contact sent a shock through my body, a jolt of pure terror. I tried to pull away, but it was too strong. The other two figures flanked me, each grabbing one of my arms, dragging me back toward the fog. Their grip was unyielding. The world around me seemed to dissolve. The base, the fog, everything blurring together in a sickening whirl of shadows. The voice spoke again, this time louder, more forceful. "You will stay." I was pulled into the fog and everything went black. I woke up hours later, or maybe it was days. Time didn't seem to exist anymore. I was lying on cold, damp ground, my body aching. My mind was foggy, but I remembered what had happened. I remembered the figures, the bodies, the things that weren't supposed to be real. I tried to move, but my body felt stiff, uncooperative. I sat up, wiping the dirt from my eyes, and for a brief moment, I thought maybe I was still dreaming, maybe it had all been a nightmare. But when my eyes adjusted, I saw it, the base. But it wasn't right. The walls were cracked, the windows dark and empty, as if the place had been abandoned for years. The fog had thickened, wrapping around the building like a shroud. And standing in the distance, at the edge of the base, I saw them again. The figures, watching, waiting. I wasn't alone, and whatever they were, they weren't finished with me.